Alright, listen. Because what just happened on that couch might be the single most disastrous damage control interview of the year, and I'm not even sure she realizes it yet. Claressa Shields finally sat down to clear her name, to tell her truth, to end the conversation about Remy Ma and Papoose once and for all. And instead she walked straight into a timeline trap of her own making, contradicted herself inside of 5 minutes, and accidentally confirmed the one detail everybody's been whispering about for 2 years. Stay with me, because by the end of this, you're going to understand why fans aren't saying she broke up a happy home anymore. They're saying something way worse. They're saying the math doesn't math, and math don't lie, baby. So here's the setup, for anybody just catching up. Claressa Shields, the greatest women's boxer of her generation, 2-time Olympic gold medalist, undisputed champion, a woman who has literally never lost a fight that mattered, sat down for a long, glossy, sympathetic interview to talk about love. Specifically, her love. Her and Papoose. The rapper. The man who spent nearly 2 decades as one half of hip-hop's most famous ride-or-die marriage with Remy Ma. And look, going in, the mission was obvious. The narrative that's followed Claressa Shields around like a shadow is that she jumped into a marriage that was still breathing. Her job in that chair was simple: kill that narrative, look graceful doing it, and promote the heck out of her biopic while she's at it. That's it. That's the whole assignment. And somehow, some way, it went left almost immediately. Let's start with the claim she led with, because it's the load-bearing wall of this entire interview. Claressa said, and I'm paraphrasing, but barely, that all she did was be in a happy relationship. That she tries to avoid even mentioning the ex. That it's just her and Pap, that's it, no drama, no intertwining, everybody else is manufacturing a story. She said people keep pushing this idea that she broke up a happy home, and her exact position was, that never happened. There was no happy home to break up. And she said she let that narrative run because that's what they tell celebrities to do. Don't respond. Don't feed it. She had a movie coming out, her biopic, The Fire Inside, Christmas Day release, 3 months in theaters, and everybody around her said, Claressa, this moment is too big. Don't step in the mess. Okay. Fine. That's actually a coherent defense. You stayed quiet for the sake of the bag. Respectable, even. But then she kept talking. Because the interviewer asked her, in the most gentle way possible, whether she could ever see a day where she and Remy Ma see eye to eye. And here is where the tone shifted. Claressa Shields said, sure, that's when people hold themselves accountable. She said this whole story about mistresses and cheating needs to stop because it never existed. She said she has no smoke with Remy Ma. It's not beef. She doesn't know why people make it beef. Maybe Remy dislikes her, sure, but from her side, it's nothing. Nothing unforgivable happened on either end. Now, I need you to hold 2 of her statements side by side for a second. In one breath, Claressa says she never addresses the situation, that she let the narrative run, that she stays in her lane and avoids the whole conversation. In the very next breath, she diagnoses exactly what needs to happen for peace. Remy Ma needs to hold herself accountable. Accountability for what, exactly? If nothing happened, if no home was broken, if there's no beef, no smoke, nothing unforgivable, then what is there for a woman who's been married for the better part of 2 decades to be accountable for? You can't have it both ways. Either the story is a complete fabrication and there's nothing to answer for, or somebody did something that requires accountability. Claressa Shields managed to say both in the same sitting, on camera, with a straight face. And the internet, baby. The internet noticed. But it gets so much worse. Because then she volunteered the dates. Nobody pressed her. Nobody had receipts on the table. She just gave the timeline away. Here's what Claressa Shields said, plainly. She met Papoose on July 6, 2024, she's so sure of it that she gave the exact date, down to the day. That's a woman who has the anniversary circled in her phone. Fine. Then, a few minutes later, when she's describing the early days of the relationship, the phone calls, the intimacy, the routine, she says they were together for 6 months before everything got exposed. 6 months. Her words. Now do the math with me, because apparently nobody in that room did. Remy Ma blew the situation up publicly on December 2, 2024. That's the exposure date. 6 months before December 2nd is June 2nd. But Claressa says she met the man on July 6th. July to December is 5 months. Not 6. 5. So either the relationship started a full month before the day she swears they met, which raises a question I am not going to say out loud, but you already heard it in your head, or somebody is rounding up in a very convenient direction. And before anybody says, oh, she just misspoke, it's 1 month, relax, understand something. This is the entire case. The timeline is the case. When the accusation against you is, you were dealing with a married man before his marriage was over, the dates are not a detail. The dates are the whole trial. And she fumbled them, unprompted, in a friendly interview, while trying to clear her name. And the timeline problem doesn't even stop at the arithmetic. Because in that same stretch of the interview, Claressa Shields described her one non-negotiable going into the relationship with Papoose. And what she described was this: they're on the phone all day. They fall asleep on the phone together every single night. That was her condition. And she said he did it, 6 months straight. 6 months straight of falling asleep on the phone together. Hold on. Stop. Run that back. This man was married. Legally, publicly, famously married. By Claressa's own account, the divorce situation was still working its way through the courts. She said that herself, we'll get to it. So what she is describing, in her own words, in her own voice, is a married man sneaking onto the phone with her every night, falling asleep on the line, for months, while his wife was, by every account, still in the picture. She presented this as a love story. She presented this as proof of devotion. He met my non-negotiable. He stayed on the phone. And I genuinely don't think she understands what she confessed to. Because the audience didn't hear devotion. The audience heard a man living a double life with a phone curfew. The audience heard how they got caught. Think about it, how do you get discovered falling asleep on the phone with somebody? Somebody else hears it. Somebody in that house heard that phone still connected, heard breathing, heard whatever there was to hear, and the whole thing detonated on December 2nd. She basically narrated her own exposure and framed it as romance. That's not a flex. That's evidence. And here's the part that made people's jaws actually hit the floor. The interviewer asked her about trust, like any woman hearing, I'm married but I'm figuring out the divorce, is going to say yeah, right. And Claressa Shields agreed. She said exactly that. She said, any woman hears that, she's like, yeah right. She said Papoose had to prove it to her. And then the interviewer asked about the holdup, why isn't the divorce done, and Claressa explained, very casually, that divorce doesn't happen overnight. They've been to court. They were married 16 plus years. There's a lot to divide. And, her words, there's a kid involved. There's a kid involved. So then came the question that turned this from a messy interview into a full-blown internet trial. Have you had a relationship with a child? And Claressa Shields, champion, trailblazer, a woman who has stared down the most dangerous fighters on the planet, gave a one-word answer. No. No. 2 years in. Publicly inseparable. Talking about love, talking about non-negotiables, talking about it's just me and Pap against the world, and she has never met his daughter. Not once. And look, I want to be careful here, because a child is not a prop and nobody should be forcing introductions for content. That little girl's piece matters more than anybody's storyline. But that's exactly the point. You cannot sit in that chair and sell the world a fairy tale about how solid this love is, how it's just the two of you, how everybody else is inventing drama, and then admit that the single most important person in your man's life, his child, is someone you have never even been in a room with. That doesn't mean she's a villain for it. What it means is the picture she's painting is not the picture that's real. If this relationship were what she says it is, that introduction would have happened a long time ago. The fact that it hasn't tells you exactly where the gravity in that situation still sits. And it doesn't sit in her living room. It gets heavier. Because she was also asked about the living situation, do y'all live together? And the answer she gave was genuinely one of the strangest answers I've ever heard in a celebrity interview. She said it's half and half. Half and half. Half here, half there. Which sounds like an answer until you think about it for even 4 seconds. Half and half is not a living situation, it's a visitation schedule. And that would be fine. Plenty of couples do long distance, plenty of couples keep two homes, except she framed the entire relationship as this all-consuming, inseparable, fall asleep on the phone every night love. Those two things do not coexist. You don't fall asleep on the phone with somebody who lives with you. The phone routine she bragged about is the routine of a man who goes home somewhere else. She described the arrangement twice in the same interview and contradicted herself both times without noticing. Now, let's talk about the DM situation, because this right here, is the part of the story the interview didn't touch at all, and it's the part the streets care about most. The reason this whole saga has such a bad smell to people was never just, woman dates separated man. People have forgiven that 1,000 times. The reason the public latched on and never let go is the allegation that before any of this, Claressa Shields was in Remy Ma's direct messages. Being friendly. Being a fan, allegedly. Complimenting her, asking about style, moving like a supporter. And then, somehow, ending up with the husband. That's the betrayal architecture that made this story nuclear. That's why, girl's girl, became a loaded phrase in this interview. The interviewer literally called her a girl's girl, you support women, people love you, and set it up like a compliment. But everybody watching heard the trap. Because you don't get to be a girl's girl in the same breath as a story where you allegedly befriended a woman and then ended up with her husband. And she never addressed it. Not once. The DM sat in the room like an uninvited guest for the entire interview, and she stepped around them like furniture. And here's the detail that broke the internet's brain worse than anything else. In trying to explain how organic all of this was, Claressa Shields suggested she didn't really know who Papoose was when they met. He was just a rapper. She didn't know him like that. Stop. Stop it. I'm supposed to believe you were close enough to Remy Ma to be in her messages, close enough to know her, admire her, engage with her, but you had no idea who her husband was? The husband she's been publicly, famously married to for nearly 20 years. The man whose entire public identity for 2 decades was Remy Ma's husband. The man who was on a hit reality franchise with her, on our television screens, for years. It is not possible to know who Remy Ma is and not know who Papoose is. It's like knowing Beyoncé but never having heard of Jay-Z. It doesn't compute. And the fact that she reached for that she needed the origin story to be that clean, tells you she knows exactly how the real origin story looks. You only sanitize a story when you understand what's dirty about it. Now. Let me be fair for a moment, because somebody in the comments is already typing it. Did Claressa Shields catch a level of heat for this relationship that other women in similar situations didn't? Honestly, maybe. People pointed out that other artists have dated men in messy, unfinished situations and caught a fraction of the backlash. Some folks, including one very loud commentator this week, tried to say the difference is colorism, that if she were lighter, the internet would have let her live. And I hear the argument, I do. But I think it misses what's actually happening here, because the backlash was never really about the relationship alone. It's about the conduct around it. It's the accumulation. It's the viral moments, the public spats, the talking tough, the contradictions, the calling people out and then crying victim when people call back. Other women caught heat for their situations too, plenty of lighter-skinned women get dragged on this app daily, there are entire channels dedicated to it. The difference with Claressa Shields is that she keeps giving the internet new material. Every interview is a new exhibit. Every time she sits down to fix it, it gets worse. At some point the common denominator isn't the public. It's the press tour. And while we're being fair, let's be fair to Remy Ma for a second too, because the framing of this interview quietly tried to reposition her. Think about what was implied, that there's this narrative machine out there painting Claressa as a homewrecker, and it's all fans, all fabrication, all projection. But Remy Ma is not a narrative. Remy Ma is a woman who found out, publicly, painfully, on a timeline that overlapped with her own marriage, that her husband of nearly 2 decades was building something with somebody new. Whatever you think of how she handled it, whatever you think of December 2nd, the woman reacted to a detonation in her actual life. And through this whole interview, Claressa kept saying, it's just me and Pap, keep me out of what they have going on, I don't want to be intertwined. But you don't get to opt out of the intertwining. When you build a relationship with a man who is still legally entangled, courts, assets, a child, 16+ years of shared life, you are intertwined by definition. The court still sees them as married. On paper, legally, today, that is somebody's husband. If that man ended up in a hospital tomorrow, the person making decisions would be his wife. Not the girlfriend of 2 years. That's not me being mean, that's just the legal architecture of the situation she chose. You can love whoever you want. But you cannot love a man in the middle of a marriage and then act confused that the marriage is part of your story. So where does that leave everything? Let's tally what this interview was supposed to accomplish versus what it actually accomplished. It was supposed to kill the homewrecker narrative. Instead, she confirmed the relationship's timeline overlaps a period when the marriage was, by her own admission, still being unwound in court. It was supposed to show a mature, unbothered woman above the drama. Instead, she took a veiled shot about accountability at a woman she claims to have no issue with. It was supposed to sell a great love story. Instead, we learn she's never met his daughter, the living arrangement is half and half, and the crown jewel of their romance is a phone routine that reads less like devotion and more like surveillance. It was supposed to promote her movie. And to be fair, it's out there now, everybody's talking, so maybe in the warped math of publicity, it worked. But the character question that follows her didn't get answered. It got underlined. And I keep coming back to the one quiet moment that said more than everything else combined. No. That's all she said when they asked about the little girl. No. No story, no spin, no softening. 2 years, a man she says she'll marry, talk of babies and forever, and the door to that child's life is closed to her. People can debate timelines and DMs and who knew who when. But that single syllable tells you where the real boundaries in this situation are drawn, and who drew them. A man shows you who he prioritizes by what he protects. And what's being protected here isn't the new relationship. So now I need to hear from you, because this one split the timeline clean in half. Was this interview a misunderstanding, a woman with no media training walking into traps and fumbling dates that don't mean anything? Or was it what half the internet is calling it, the slow-motion self-exposure of a story that was never going to survive being said out loud? And the bigger question, does Remy Ma owe anybody accountability in this, like Claressa suggested, or is that the most audacious line of the entire interview? Sound off below. Side A or Side B, no fence sitting, the comments are open, settle it. And keep this in mind before you go, there's one date in this saga that still doesn't have an explanation attached to it. Not July 6th. Not December 2nd. The other one, the one that decides whether any of this was ever what either of them says it was. When that one surfaces, and it will, everything we just talked about is going to look like the trailer. That's the tea as it stands. You know I'll be back the second it boils over.